Hi, I'm Barry Ostrowski. At RWJ Barnabas Health, we believe that everyone needs to be informed about the important healthcare issues affecting their lives. That's why we're proud to support the important educational programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation.
Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by RWJ Barnabas Health, the North Ward Center, PSE&G, committed to improving New Jersey's economy and strengthening its communities, the Fidelco Group, Verizon, Josh S. Weston, and by the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, founded by the Jewish community. Promotional support provided by NJ.com, Small News, Big News, True Jersey, and by Observer New Jersey Politics.
This is One-on-One. I'm an equal American just like you are.
The jobs of tomorrow are not the jobs of yesterday.
Look at this. You got this?
Here it is, man. Look at that.
Life without dance is boring.
When you first heard that they were doing Charlie Rose and Gayle King, didn't you go, what?
Do you enjoy talking politics?
No.
People call me because they feel nobody's paying attention.
Our culture, I don't think, has ever been tested the way it's being tested right now.
Such a good question. High five.
Hi, this is Steve Adubato. More importantly, I'm here at in the atrium of the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. This is an extraordinary place where the most important conversations often take place, and tonight is no exception. Tonight is a conversation that is called Moving New Jersey's Communities Forward, a critical conversation about race and policing. The Institute for Social Justice has put it together along with some partnering organizations, and we decided to come here and talk to some folks who are part of the audience. 600 people have RSVP'd, a group of distinguished panelists representing all different perspectives in the minority community and in the law enforcement community. So the question becomes, could Newark be, with all of its challenges in the police and minority community over the years since the rebellion of 1967, could Newark become a model for how the police and the minority community interact moving forward? That is what the discussion is about tonight at NJPAC. Those are the people we'll be talking to. That is the subject, and this is a half hour that is worth checking out. Ryan Haygood, President and CEO of New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. My friend, let me ask you, we are here to have an important conversation. Why and how did it come about?
So thanks for having me on your show, Steve. This conversation really emanated from a broader national discussion that's happening around race and policing. And as you and your viewers know, over the last several years, we've been watching, holding our collective breaths as we respond to a number of violent encounters with law enforcement in communities that left mostly African-American men dead. And then we saw, following those tragedies, police officers whose lives were also claimed in Dallas and in Baton Rouge. And there were people here in New Jersey who were wondering, what does that mean for us here? And more importantly, how can we treat what we've seen happen nationally as a cautionary tale about how we should be building relationships between law enforcement and community leaders here in New Jersey. And so actually I started talking to Mayor Baraka shortly after the most recent shooting about how we could together put something together for the broader community around race and policing. But Steve, that looks at this from an opportunity perspective.
How's this an opportunity?
We've had a number of things happen recently in Newark and New Jersey more broadly, which I think position us to lead the country on issues of police reform. So there was a devastating opinion or report by the Department of Justice, as you well know, that showed that 75% of all police stops by the Newark Police Department were found to be unconstitutional. And that's devastating, and that's a real challenge for us. But out of that, a number of things happened. One was that the city entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice to bring about widespread police reform in the city. So there's a federal monitor, Peter Harvey, who will help to oversee these police reform.
Who's a part of tonight's discussion?
He's a panelist tonight. The second piece, in addition to the consent decree and the federal monitors, the city recently passed a citizen complaint review board to empower citizens to look over police misconduct and to evaluate that police misconduct. And the third is that within the last year, past Attorney General John Hoffman issued a body-worn camera directive requiring all state troopers this year to wear body cameras by the end of this year. And that directive is influencing how cities are requiring police to wear those devices as well. But there's a broader moment, I think. So there are these reforms happening, those three in particular. But I think there's a broader opportunity here for us, and that one that people in the city of Newark have really been thinking about for the last 49 years, going back to the Newark Rebellion.
1967.
1967. July 12th was the 49th anniversary. And that is, Steve, how to reimagine how we do policing in urban communities, impacting people of color in particular. We often think of police officers as armed patrolmen, and they are. But what about if we reimagine police officers as community organizers who built trust in communities, who maybe even live in those communities, who are invested in the community in a way that they help to build, yes, public safety, but build trust to stand beside community members and empower the community together. And that's, I think, a moment we have because of what we've seen happen across the country, because of those three recent developments here in Newark and in New Jersey more broadly, and because I think we have an opportunity to reimagine policing from a fresh perspective.
You know what's so interesting about this is that as we listen to Ryan, and his organization has again taken the lead in this, and the Newark 350 organizations involved as well. But what's interesting is that the law enforcement community is actively involved in this discussion tonight. You'll be seeing some footage of several hundred people here at the Victoria Theater at NJPAC in the audience. But one of the participants is also the head of public safety here in the city of Newark, Anthony Ambrose, who is a former chief of the police department here in the city of Newark. Why is his participation, why is the participation, the active participation of the Newark Police Department and those who are in other police departments across this state and nation so critical?
Yeah, so I think that's another opportunity moment for us. You know, the conversation nationally has been really polarizing, right? So you're either pro-Black Lives Matter.
Who are you for? Is it Black or Blue Lives Matter? Instead of, what should be the question?
Right, and the question, the answer to that question is it's both. You can have enough space in your heart to support Black Lives Matter, and you can also advance an agenda in which police officers are empowered to work with communities to do their job. So you can't have this conversation fairly without having someone like Director Ambrose be central to it, without having the mayor who's overseeing this transformation in his police department be a part of it, and having Peter Harvey, who is the federal monitor, to participate in this, but also someone—
And a representative from Black Lives Matter.
And to your point, someone from Black Lives Matter. Zellie Imani, who is a lead organizer of Black Lives Matter in New Jersey, offers a perspective that you have to have when you're having these conversations. So part of what we want to do tonight, and we've had 600 RSVPs by last night's count, right? So there is obvious interest in the broader community around this conversation, but it has to be a conversation on both sides where there's been polarization to find out how we strike a safe middle space that empowers communities and helps police officers do the job that they signed up to do.
To Ryan's point, it's so interesting. At the Caucus Educational Corporation, in cooperation with our partners in public television, particularly NJTV, WNET, we're embarking, and this is part of what we're doing, embarking on trying to have this conversation as well. And in all candor, Ryan, we struggle with the question of how can we do this? Because we've seen some networks try to do this, and it's turned into a screaming match, pointing the fingers at each other, blaming. How do we do this without any of that which has absolutely no value or productivity?
Well, I have to say, I don't know that some of that won't happen tonight, candidly, with an open forum such as the one we have and with so many participants. You know, folks come to these kinds of conversations having been impacted in various ways. So
a lot of emotion.
It's quite possible that we'll have someone who has lost a relative, a loved one, at the hands of a violent encounter with law enforcement. And candidly, what I think we are in this moment sort of requiring of police officers and law enforcement more broadly is some recognition that something is wrong. And we've seen this manifest itself in a number of ways over the last several years. But, you know, I'm 40 years old, and I was thinking about preparing for tonight's event, and I was reminded of Rodney King and how in that moment, that was one of the rare moments in the 1990s that was recorded.
Los Angeles, 1992?
And Americans approach that very differently based on their race. So African-American folks recognized how foul what was happening to him was. But a mostly white jury looked at that same footage and determined that what the officers did there was justified. And that, I think, that default, sort of the way we see the world, impacts how we view what's right in policing. So some of the underlying racial considerations and, frankly, racial discrimination has to be accounted for when we have conversations like these.
But finally, one more point. the law enforcement professionals here, some of whom feel that they are being targeted, that they are under siege, they have the potential to express their concerns as well, correct?
I think that's right, but I think what I have found in my own experience is that, by and large, I live in Newark in the South Ward. Community members want to work with police officers. They want to have a relationship that's built on trust, mutual respect, and the recognition of their dignity. And so I think that these spaces are important, both because they help us to have hard conversations and that are candid, but they also allow us to begin to build those bridges that have—
Feel safe.
Absolutely safe. Absolutely safe.
Safe to be able to express those point of views.
On both sides. And the objective on the other side of it is a higher level of understanding from both places. That the reality is police officers are often asked to do way more than they're required to be social service providers. They're required to be counselors, they're required to be psychologists, and some of that, I think, is beyond that which police officers have to do. And part of this, we talked about this before the show, we have produced this 10 things that—
Yeah, tell folks, before I let Ryan go, because he has a lot to organize, there are 10 things that the Institute has proposed that would really improve things as it relates to police minority relations. Tell folks the website, tell where they can find out. These are very tangible. This is criminal justice reform. This has to do with demilitarizing, if you will, the police out there. It has to do with a whole range of things.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the practical things is to look at the kinds of crimes, the kind of behavior that's considered a crime, and whether that should actually be a crime, like loitering, for example, or trespassing, if there's not actual trespass happening. But the broader reforms are things that people in the community can do working with law enforcement that aren't objectionable to reform. They can go to our website, www.njisj.org, and find that helpful document.
We're here with Zellie Imani, who is lead organizer for Black Lives Matter. I want to thank you for joining us. This issue, this forum, is critically important because?
It's important that we have these conversations so that the community and other people who may be not from this community but interested in what Black Lives Matter is and what some of the issues that we're trying to bring forth to the nation so that we can start rectifying these issues and problems that's facing many people in a lot of the marginalized communities across this nation.
So let me ask you this. So much of the conversation, so much of the media coverage focuses on the problem and how bad things are, and we need to understand that in order to improve and move things forward. If you were to say, here are one or two things we really need to do to improve things, not fix, there is no magic solution, what would they be?
I think there's two things that we could possibly do. One of them is push legislation that really enforces police accountability. Because right now, a lot of cities, we don't know what's going on for our police officers. We don't know who they're arresting. We don't know who they're stopping and frisking. And we don't even know about any internal affairs complaints regarding police officers. So a lot of the public don't even know if police in their communities are harassing or brutalizing citizens. So once we have this legislation that opens a shining light on these issues, we could then create like a community accountability board so that we can actually enforce these type of disciplinary hearings on police officers who harm our citizens.
Let me follow up on that. Is that in part because some people don't trust the process right now and local prosecutors to be in charge of those cases?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of mistrust in not just our local communities, but all across this nation, right? Since 2013, over 4,000 people have been killed by police officers, but only 1% have been convicted. So we see that police are not being held accountable all across the board. So we need to start having these type of legislations and these type of institutions that hold police accountable.
Let me follow up on this part, Zellie. There are going to be police officers participating in this conversation at the PAC tonight. The police director, the public safety director, Anthony Ambrose, is part of it tonight. We've spoken to a fair number of police leaders and rank and file who feel that some police officers are under siege, that they are being attacked on some level. What level of concern do you have for some of the rhetoric that is out there that feels anti-police to many police officers and others?
I would say that we have to really deflect what is going on. It's like a deflection going on, and that they're centering the narrative on themselves when the narrative should be always centered on the victims. And
I mean the people who say those things.
Right. It should always be centered on the people who experience the police violence and the police harassment. It's the people who are under siege by police officers. We always have to remember that as well.
It's interesting. So there was a New York rally and some other rallies where people were chanting, "What do we want? Dead cop, what do we want it now?" I'm not going to answer for you, but it just strikes me that that is not the position of the organization.
Right. But a lot of people have these very intense feelings regarding police officers, and not necessarily saying that it's right, but we have to recognize that this comes from a place that we need to have these conversations to see where this place is coming from, and that people have really traumatic experiences with police officers. We need to recognize it and also respect it and work to making these solutions.
How confident are you, given the level of fear, anxiety, resentment, that conversation can take place? I'm not even going to say calmly, because it has to be respectful, even if it's not calm, that a real conversation can take place.
That's difficult, because when we have police officers, they're in a position of power and privilege, so they may not necessarily want to remove themselves from that power and privilege. So we really have to have this conversation really amongst ourselves, community members, because we as the people really have the power to change these institutions, even when there's strong resistance from the police officers and their unions.
But isn't it important ultimately to have a dialogue with police officers to move things forward, because they're the ones that have to adapt their behavior on the streets with those they're interacting with in the community? Fair to say?
I think the conversation is important for maybe police officers to have that understanding. But again, we're talking about changing institutions and not necessarily changing the hearts and minds of individuals. So even if a few individuals, cops, may be on the side of Black Lives Matter, there may be others who aren't, and there may be policies that needs to be changed.
One more thing. How important is it that police departments simply become more diverse?
As we've seen all across the country, it's not just white police officers who are killing, unarmed Black men, but it's also sometimes different ethnicities that are killing unarmed Black men. It's even sometimes Black officers who are killing Black men. It's the issue of anti-Blackness and the whole anti-Black policies and behaviors and practices that are really institutionalized in the police system.
So increasing diversity by itself doesn't make progress?
It doesn't necessarily make progress. More Black faces or more Black representation doesn't necessarily mean there's progress.
Even at the top?
Even at the top, because that Blackness doesn't define your politics, right? Blackness doesn't define your point of view. So we don't necessarily need more Black people in these positions. What we need is people who have the same mind frame and the same belief systems that we do, not necessarily the same skin color.
I want to thank you so much for participating in this forum and being a part of a meaningful dialogue, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To see more one-on-one with Steve Adubato programs, visit us online at steveadubato.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
These are real issues, other than just these talking points and talking heads. We go back and try to get each other to talk about these talking points, and we go at each other about these talking points. But the reality is, there's real problems that people are dealing with every day, and that we're using the police to solve social problems that the government has refused to address.
Police-minority relations is a very important conversation. Roger Jacobs has been involved in a whole range of civil justice issues. It matters to you a great deal. Why does this conversation matter so much to you?
It's very important that people have confidence in the police, not just the people in Newark, but the people everywhere. People where I live in the suburbs, people here, frankly, everybody who's outside. So we need to know that the police are here not just to enforce the laws, but to be even-handed in their understanding of the law.
Archie, how do you think over time, because you've seen a few things over time, you've seen situations, how do you think it got, I hate to say it this way, this bad?
Well, I think things go in cycles, Steve. I started in the Bronx DA's office. Frankly, I hate to say it, it was a lot rougher in the Bronx when I got started. That was Bonfire of the Vanities. So I think what we're talking about with some perspective is a renaissance here in Newark, and the police has to keep in time with the changes in Newark, both in terms of its composition and its relationship to the community. I think that the different constituencies in Newark must be reflected in how the police do their job.
So hold on. We're just talking to the police, the public safety director, Anthony Ambrose, who's part of the panel tonight. And there is more diversity than ever in the Newark Police Department, more Hispanics, more African Americans. But that alone is not the answer.
No, I think the problem is there's a perception that there isn't input from the communities. So when I was looking into the monitoring, one of the things I would have done is had input from the various neighborhoods, whether it's the East Ward, the West Ward.
You mean federal monitoring?
Yes. I would have had all of the different constituencies in the city participating in input to the police department.
So let me ask you, with a federal monitor, Peter Harvey, the former Attorney General who is in the state of New Jersey, who is part of this discussion, is the Department of Justice federal monitor overseeing the Newark Police Department. How much difference do you believe that makes? You understand law better than most. What do you believe will come out of that?
I think he has the opportunity to recreate both the perception and the reality of policing in Newark. That's certainly what I would have done if I were the monitor.
How? Okay, so assume you're the monitor. What do you do?
I think you need a community advisory board working with you from all of the wards in Newark, not just the ethnic neighborhoods, business people, everything being. So, for example, as you know, I had business people from the Jewish community involved in Newark for many years. I would make sure that each of those segments is at the table, literally. So the police department is getting input on a regular basis from constituencies they might not otherwise speak to.
Shavar Jeffreis, let me ask you a question. You're a leader in this community. You understand this community. You're of this community. This conversation about police and minority relations here at NJPAC, you've come here tonight, one of 500 plus people participating. Why does it matter so much to you?
Well, it matters so much to me because there's nothing more important than the safety of our communities. And we can't have safe communities without having a positive relationship between police and community. And we have to be able to understand that cops can't do their job if they don't have partnerships with the community. And the community can't participate with cops if they don't respect and believe that the cops can respect them. So it's really a family. And we have to be able to have family conversation when there's disagreement and then leave those conversations, prepared to do what we have to do to support one another in the community.
Let me ask you this. You and I have talked off camera as well as on camera. You've been out there for a long time as a public leader, as a community leader, as an elected official.
Yes, sir.
How prepared do you believe we are to have an honest dialogue about what people are truly feeling without it, dare I say, getting out of control?
I think we're ready. And I think sometime in families there have to be tough conversations. But I think as long as we can come to the conversation knowing that we are family, that we're in this together, that our cops have a very difficult job and we need them to do their job and do it well, and that we know good cops know that they have to do it in a way that respects the civil rights and civil liberties of our residents. And so I think as long as we come from that vantage point, we'll be able to have a productive conversation. It may be difficult at times, and it should be difficult, because if it's not difficult, that means we're not being honest. But I think we're ready and we have to do it.
Sure. How much anger, if I can use that word, is there in the community regarding what's been happening with police in certain cases, particularly highly publicized cases around the country?
There's tons of anger because we've had folk of color killed after the most mundane of interactions with law enforcement. I mean, in some of these interactions, you would argue, why is law enforcement even involved? I mean, you have people who, Sandra Bland allegedly didn't signal quick enough, ends up dead. You have people who had allegedly, tail light busted, end up dead. And so when you've had a series of these sort of interactions in which people have felt like their very bodies, their very lives were subject to kind of arbitrary violence by the state, that creates a lot of anger. But at the same time, we know that many of our communities, we have so much levels of local community violence that we need police to feel affirmed, to feel supported, as long as they're doing the right thing. In any team, in any organization, you have some people doing the right thing, you have people doing the bad thing. And we should be able to differentiate those who are respecting people's rights and liberties and are doing a very difficult job in a way that they deserve nothing but honor and affirmation, and then some other few bad apples, hopefully a few, who frankly need to be corrected or frankly need to be kicked off the force.
Carlos, let me ask you a question. You are part of so many important conversations. We're here at NJPAC for this conversation about police and minority community. Your organization is all about kids interacting with, creating a better life for themselves. Why is this conversation so important?
This is not only important in our community, it's a national conversation. Unfortunately, what's happened is there's a chasm between our law enforcement and our community. And we know the power of mentoring, big brothers, big sisters, is about humanizing the other. What we have seen manifest itself, unfortunately, is a lot of us versus them dialogue, a lot of us versus them practices. And when you don't see the other as a human being, you treat them differently from our kids' perspective as well as law enforcement perspective. And so we're proud to say that we're partners with a lot of great organizations here today to launch a program called Bigs in Blue. In the spirit of crime prevention, as well as in the spirit of humanizing the other, there's nothing more powerful than to interact with another person on a one-to-one level. And you have to check your assumptions at the door. You have to check your stereotypes at the door. You have to check your thoughts of what that person is. In the one-to-one mentoring relationship, it will humanize the other. And this is a critical conversation that we need to have not only here in New Jersey, but around the country. It's a really desperate point in our history right now.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by RWJ Barnabas Health, the North Ward Center, PSE&G, the Fidelco Group, Verizon, Josh S. Weston, and by the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.
There are still 500,000 uninsured people in New Jersey who are eligible for free or low-cost health insurance. Do you or someone you know need health insurance? Or has your insurance recently changed? Healthcare.gov provides all the information you need to find new coverage. Open enrollment starts November 1st. You may qualify for financial assistance or for New Jersey Family Care. Free local assistance is available to help you understand your options and get enrolled before the deadline so you don't have to pay the penalty.